Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story.
Story number 1. The stretch of Highway 287 between Amarillo and Fort Worth had a way of swallowing up time. Drivers talked about it at truck stops, the way the miles blurred. The exits came and went like half-remembered dreams, and the sky felt too big to be real. On most nights, it was just long, flat nothing. On one particular night, it was something else. The driver's name was Grant. 15 years on the road, clean record, no accidents, no tickets. He preferred night runs when the traffic thinned out and the world narrowed to the glow of his dash and the soft hum of the tires. That November night, the air outside was cool and dry, and his refrigerated trailer hummed steadily behind him, full of frozen food bound for Dallas. The load was routine. The route was familiar. There was no reason for anything to be different. Just after midnight, with Amarillo long behind him and the fuel gauge still comfortably high, Grant noticed how empty the highway had become. Not just light traffic empty. No oncoming headlights, no taillights ahead, no faint clusters of town lights off in the distance. Only the white lines flowing under his rig and the rhythmic thud of expansion joints. He turned the radio down. The silence behind the engine noise felt thick, like he had shut off something more than music. To his left, the fields rolled out under a dark sky, a sea of nothingness. To his right, a scattering of scrub and wire fence. The stars were out, but they looked muted, as if a thin veil lay between them and the earth. The moon was hidden behind a layer of high clouds, spreading a pale, sourceless glow. Grant checked the dash clock, 12:17 a.m. He thought about making another pot of coffee on his little in-cab brewer at the next stop, but the next stop was still a ways off. He rolled his shoulders, settled his hands on the wheel, and focused on the road. That was when he saw the truck. Far ahead, just a few filtered points of red at first, a set of taillights appeared on the straightaway. Another rig, cruising along in the same direction. The sight was almost a relief, proof that he wasn't alone on that blank stretch of asphalt. As he drew closer, something about the truck bothered him, though it took a minute to realize what it was. The trailer was plain white. No logo, no lettering, no dot numbers, no reflective stickers. Just a rectangle of dim, matte white that seemed to absorb his headlights rather than reflect them. The rig itself was the same, an unmarked sleeper cab, its paint a generic dull gray. No company name. No decorative lights blazing down the sides or around the grille. It moved at a steady pace, maybe 3 or 4 miles under the speed limit. Grant eased off the accelerator slightly, letting the distance close more slowly as he checked his mirrors and the blind spots out of habit. The highway remained eerily empty. No approaching headlights. No other taillights behind him. He flipped on the CB, set to channel 19. Static hissed softly through the speaker. "Southbound gray with a white box on 287, he said, voice casual. "You got a copy up there?" Silence. He waited. Sometimes drivers ran with the volume off, or they were dozing, or they just didn't feel like talking. He tried again. Unmarked rig on 287 about. He glanced at the mile marker flashes. Mile 182, you got ears on. Static, not even the distant murmur of background chatter. Grant frowned and left the mic in its clip. No big deal. Not everyone lived on their radio. He crept closer, staying a few car lengths back. The unmarked trailer had no dirt patterns from road spray, no signs of age, no scrapes, no dents. It looked new but not polished. Just blank. Drawing even with the trailer, he stole a quick look at the tires. The sidewalls looked ordinary enough, turning smoothly, but in his headlights, The shadows beneath the trailer looked deeper than they should, like a pool of ink running along the asphalt. He shook the thought off as fatigue and signaled to pass. As he pulled alongside the trailer, he glanced right, toward the cab. The truck's darkened passenger window reflected his own headlights in a soft glare, making it hard to see inside. The truck's engine rumbled steadily, pitchless, like a recording of an engine noise instead of the real thing. He eased forward, half expecting the other driver to turn his head or glance over. Drivers usually did, a reflexive nod, a quick assessment. No movement. Grant drew his own truck even with the blank gray cab. Through the driver's window, lit by faint, washed-out dashboard light, there was a shape in the seat. A figure, but the details blurred. He could not make out a face or even the color of the shirt. It was as if someone had sketched a person in light pencil and then smudged it with a thumb. The impression was there. Someone was sitting behind that wheel. They just didn't look finished. A ripple of cold ran down Grant's arms. He pressed the accelerator a bit and began to pull ahead. As his cab drew level with the nose of the gray rig, a strange sensation washed over him, like driving through a pocket of colder air. The hair on his arms stirred painfully, prickling hard under his skin. The feeling was over as quickly as it came. He glanced in the mirror as the unmarked truck slid back into the rear view, its headlamps pale and colorless in the dark. Just ahead, a green reflective sign flashed into his headlights. Exit 185, rest area, 1 mile. Grant hesitated. He didn't need fuel. He wasn't especially tired. His schedule was on track. But the encounter with the odd truck had scratched a restless itch in his mind, and the thought of pulling into a lit rest area, even for 5 minutes, was suddenly appealing. He flicked on his signal and drifted into the right lane, casting another look at the mirror. The gray truck stayed in the left lane, a steady presence. The exit ramp curved gently away from the highway. He took it, the rumble strips buzzing under his tires for a moment. The main lanes of 287 swung past and out of sight as he rolled down toward the rest area. The place was mostly empty. A long line of parking slots stretched under high sodium lights, bathing the pavement in a small brick restroom building in a tired orange glow. A few cars huddled near the building. Farther down, one other semi sat dark and quiet, curtains drawn, the sleeping driver invisible. Grant pulled into an open slot midway down the lot and set the brake. The engine idled, shaking the cab faintly. He checked the clock. 12:19 a.m. 2 minutes. That was all it had been since he'd first noticed the gray truck's taillights. The thought bothered him more than it should have. He sat for a moment, listening. Somewhere out in the fields beyond the lights, a lone coyote barked. The wind pushed faintly at the side of the trailer. Grant shut off the engine. Silence settled around the truck like a blanket. He considered making coffee, then decided against it. He told himself he'd just stretch his legs, maybe splash some water on his face, then get back on the road. Stepping down from the cab, he stood still and took a breath. The air felt cooler than it had an hour ago, colder. His footsteps echoed softly on the pavement as he walked toward the restroom building. The other parked semi remained dark and still. The cars were quiet, no movement inside. Inside the restroom, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The place was cleaner than he expected. The mirror reflected his lined, tired face, the pale brim of his cap, the shadow of stubble. He ran cold water, splashed his face, patted it dry with a paper towel. When he stepped back outside, the lot looked exactly the same. His truck, the other truck, the few cars, the highway beyond, a moving band of light as a distant vehicle passed. Relieved to see at least one car on the highway, he walked back to his rig, climbed inside, and settled behind the wheel. The dash lights glowed softly when he turned the key. The engine vibrated the cab back to life. He checked his log, made a quick note of the brake, and pulled out, following the signs back to I-287 southbound. The entrance ramp rose up and merged with the highway. He checked his side mirror. No one in the right lane. He eased into the flow, though there was no flow to join. The road ahead stretched out empty, the white lines streaming under his headlights. He glanced at the dash clock. 12:17 a.m. Grant stared at the glowing numbers. They did not change. He blinked, frowning, and looked away, then back. 12:17 a.m. He told himself the clock had glitched. Electronics did that sometimes. A soft reset, a momentary freeze. He checked his phone, resting in its cradle. The lock screen stared back at him. 12:17 a.m. He exhaled slowly, keeping his hand steady on the wheel. The highway rolled out, unbroken. No other vehicles in sight. No rest area lights behind him in the mirrors either, though that might have just been the curve of the road and the low shoulder. Mile marker 185 passed on his right. Green numbers, 185. He had just left exit 185. Must be counted differently, he muttered, but discomfort coiled in his stomach. A few miles later, another green sign appeared ahead, its reflective surface blooming in his headlights. Exit 185, rest area, 1 mile. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, knuckles paling. The sign was identical, the same extra space between the 1 and the mile, the same bullet marks in the corner of the sheet metal. He had noticed those without really noting them, the way drivers clock little details. He checked the clock again. 12:17 a.m. "Okay," he whispered, his voice foreign in his own ears. "Okay, fatigue. This is what fatigue does." He thought about pulling over to the shoulder, but some old instinct warned against it. Parked on the side of an empty highway with something strange going on felt like asking for trouble. Ahead, the exit ramp rose again. Same curve. Same lit rest area below. Even from the highway, the positions of the vehicles in the lot looked identical. He didn't want to take the exit. Every part of him tightened at the thought of following the same path. But as his rig drew even with the off-ramp, the steering wheel felt heavier, almost as if the truck had developed a preference. It drifted slightly right, a slow slide, like a boat nudging toward a familiar dock. Grant forced the wheel straight, muscles straining. Sweat broke out along his spine. The tires hummed at the edge of the lane. The off-ramp beckoned at the periphery. There was no traffic, nothing to force him one way or the other. Mile after slow, grinding mile, he kept the truck centered in the lane, jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. The exit slipped past on his right and fell away behind. The feeling in the wheel lightened at once, like something had relaxed its grip. He let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The road ahead remained empty. The sky looked no different. The landscape rolled by, fields and fence and scattered scrub. The clock on the dash changed. 12:18 a.m. He almost laughed out loud, the sound catching in his throat instead, half sob, half breath. The phone agreed. 12:18 a.m. Grant told himself it was done. The moment had passed, just a glitch, some loop in his overtired brain. He drove another mile. Another. He fixed his attention on the mile markers, calling them out softly. 186, 187. His shoulders began to unlock. His heartbeat slowed. Up ahead, white specks of reflected paint drifted up from the dark. Another sign. A standard green rectangle. As it grew clearer in his headlights, the words formed with dreadful certainty. Exit 185, rest area, 1 mile. Grant's fingers dug into the wheel until the vinyl creaked. His tongue felt thick in his mouth. Every instinct screamed at him now, an animal panic. He didn't look at the clock. He didn't look at his phone. He fixed his eyes on the horizon, where the faint smear of the next town's glow should have been. There was nothing there, only darkness and the endless reach of the highway. The sign passed. The ramp loomed again, a copy of a copy. This time he braced himself before the truck began to drift, holding the wheel so tightly his hands trembled. The pull came sooner, more insistent. It felt less like the truck wanted to exit and more like the road itself sloped imperceptibly toward the ramp, guiding anything on it down into that lit bowl of sameness. "No," he said, teeth clenched. "No." The engine tone deepened as he pressed harder on the accelerator, as though speed alone might break the pattern. But the road markings stayed the same, the world outside unchanged. The exit ramp tracked alongside, refusing to fall away. For a breathless span of seconds, truck and exit ran side by side, impossibly parallel. Then, with a twitch of effort that left his arms burning, Grant forced the wheel left, nudging the rig toward the center median. The pull at the steering wheel fought him, but this time he had momentum. The gap between highway and ramp widened inch by inch until, abruptly, the sensation dropped away, leaving him freewheeling on a straight, empty road. His breath came in ragged gulps. The ramp slid back, then out of sight. Silence on the CB, silence on the road, the sky flat and indifferent. Up ahead, twin red points of light appeared, low and steady. Tail lights. Grant's mouth went dry. The lights ran in his lane far ahead. As he gained, the shape of the trailer resolved out of the darkness, white, unmarked matte, the same height, the same geometry, the gray cab, the absence of logo, of personality, of anything but a blank, moving weight. He checked the mirror without meaning to. In the distance behind him, nearly lost against the night, a pale set of headlights appeared, far back but there, two bright dots eating the distance at an identical pace. In front of him, the unmarked truck, a featureless block of white on gray. Behind him, another pair of lights, aligning with his lane exactly. Grant's heart hammered. He flipped his turn signal on and moved cautiously into the left lane to pass. The unmarked truck ahead did not react. Its engine note, when he came close, was the same muted rumble, stripped of texture. He eased up beside the trailer again, closer this time, studying it. No hinges, no handles, no latch. Just a continuous sheet of white, like an empty page waiting for words that never came. The hair on his neck rose. He forced himself to look at the cab window. The shape in the driver's seat was there again, an outline more than a person, faintly haloed by the instrument glow. No face, no eyes, just the sense of something occupying the space. And for the briefest sliver of a second, as the trucks ran side by side, Grant saw himself. Not the figure in his own cab, though he knew he was there, gripping his wheel with white-knuckled hands, but a reflection in the other truck's glass. His own cab, his own truck, his own face staring back. Only in that reflection his headlights were off. His cabin was dark, and his own face, washed out and hollow, looked straight ahead without moving its mouth, as if carved from wax. The instant shattered as the angle changed and the glare took over. Grant slammed his foot down, surging ahead, desperate to be clear of the unmarked rig. As he pulled in front, the pull at the wheel returned, but weaker now, a distant tugging. He pushed through it, keeping the truck straight, focusing on the lines. When he finally dared to look back, both mirrors showed emptiness. No gray truck, no headlights behind him. Just the night and the hum of the tires. For a long time he didn't speak, didn't change the radio, didn't touch the CB. The clock crept forward again. 12:22, 12:29, 12:41. At last a faint glow appeared ahead, smudging the horizon. Small town lights, gas station signs, the miniature comforts of civilization. Grant pulled into the first well-lit truck stop he found. The building glowed warm against the dark, its fluorescent canopy buzzing. Other rigs were parked in uneven rows, their sleepers lit by the light-polluted sky. Inside, under the sharp, safe brightness of the dining area, he sat with a cup of coffee clutched in both hands, letting the heat soak into his cold fingers. People moved around him. Conversations rose and fell, ordinary and forgettable. A TV in the corner ran muted news. The clock above the counter read 1:13 a.m. Eventually, another trucker in a faded denim jacket slid onto the stool next to him, nodding a greeting. "Long night?" the man asked. Grant considered his answer. The story pressed against his teeth, but something in him recoiled at the idea of putting it into words, of giving it more shape than it already had. "Yeah," he said softly, "just the miles." The other driver nodded with a knowing half-smile. "That stretch out there does funny things. Lose time, gain time, get the feeling you're the only soul on the road." He took a sip of his own coffee. "You see the rest area at 185. Grant's hand tightened around his cup. "Yeah." The man watched him for a long moment. "Some folks say if you stop there at the wrong time of night, you keep stopping there, over and over, until you don't leave at all." He shrugged. "Stories, you know how it goes." Grant stared at the coffee's surface, at the faint quiver of the liquid. "You ever seen an unmarked rig out there?" he asked before he could stop himself. "Plain white box, no numbers, gray cab." The other man's eyes flicked up. For a split second, there was something like recognition there, or perhaps it was just the reflection of old rumors. "Lots of company trucks don't bother with extra paint," he said mildly. "But if you're talking about a real blank, might be one of those stories too." "What stories?" "About the trucks that run the roads between things." The man smiled without humor. "Between exits that don't line up, between the time on your dash and the time on the wall." He drained his cup and set it down. "Best way to deal with those stories is not to ask them for details. Just keep the wheels turning, stick to the lanes you know." Grant watched him walk away. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere outside, air brakes hissed and another truck rattled to a stop. When he finally went back out to his own rig, the cab smelled faintly of cold air and diesel, and something else. A trace of unfamiliar scent, like a place with no windows would smell. He checked his mirrors 3 times before easing out of the lot, watching the dark edges of the highway for any hint of pale, reflectionless paint. The rest of the trip passed without incident. By dawn, he had blended the memory of the loop, the rest area, and the unmarked truck into a single knot, and tucked it into the same hidden place all drivers kept their stranger nights. But for years afterward, every time a green sign loomed out of the dark with the promise of a rest area ahead, Grant found his hands tightening on the wheel, his gaze flicking to the clock. And on certain nights, when the road was completely empty and the sky felt too wide, he would catch, for just an instant, a ghostly shape in his mirrors, a flash of white trailer, a hint of gray cab, vanishing the moment he tried to focus on it. He never stopped at exit 185 again. Story number 2. Lena had been running nights for long enough that the dark felt more familiar than daylight. The world made sense when it narrowed down to the glow of her dash, the twin beams of her headlights, and the low murmur of other drivers on the CB. She liked the routine of it, the way the miles ticked by like beads on a string. Her usual run took her from Boise down into northern Nevada, then across a web of state routes and 2-lane highways that locals knew and most GPS units didn't. There was one stretch she always hated, though she couldn't put her finger on why. It was a lonely ribbon of road cutting through high desert and scrub, where the land rolled in long, empty waves. The sky there always seemed too big. Cell service faded in and out. The air grew colder, even in late spring, and the wind had a way of pushing at the trailer like it wanted it off the pavement. Somewhere along that stretch, between nothing and nowhere, was mile marker 43. Years back, there had been a small way station there. The building was set off to the right, a low, square structure with a short row of parking spots, a rusted flagpole, and a set of scales sunk into the pavement. It had been closed long before Lena started running that route. Drivers talked about it only when they needed a landmark. Just past the dead scale at 43, they said. Watch for ice there in winter. The state had put up a sign that read Way Station closed in big reflective letters. Grass grew through cracks in the lot. The windows were dark. That was all. On a clear Tuesday night in early fall, Lena rolled southbound toward that marker with a full load of produce. The sky was moonless, scraped with stars. The CB crackled occasionally with chatter from trucks much farther down the highway, voices fading in and out like dreams. She was humming along just under the limit when the overhead sign appeared ahead, its green face glowing in her headlights. Way Station 1 mile. Lena frowned. There shouldn't have been a sign. The station had been out of service for years. The state didn't waste money fixing signs for places that didn't exist anymore. Maybe she just never noticed it, she told herself. Maybe it had always been there, a leftover nobody bothered to take down. She eased off the accelerator a hair, watching. Up ahead, past the gentle rise in the road, a cluster of sodium lights shimmered faintly against the dark, exactly where the station should have been. Her CB hissed with a burst of static. Then a calm male voice rolled through the speaker, clear as if he were sitting beside her. Southbound reefer, lane 1 for the scales, please. Mile 43 station. Lights are green, come on in. Lena's hand tightened on the wheel. She glanced at the radio, then at the road. No one else was near her. She checked her mirrors out of habit. Her trailer was the only thing back there. No headlights, no one passing, nothing. Southbound reefer, that's you with the lettuce and berries, right? The voice continued, a faint smile under the words. Bring it on through for a quick weight check. Lane 1, mile 43. A little burst of cold moved through her chest. He couldn't know what she was hauling. No one on the road could see through a sealed trailer, and the old station at 43 was dead. Everyone knew that. She reached for the CB anyway, more out of reflex than decision, and thumbed the button. Negative on that Way Station, she said. I'm showing your stop as closed on my route. You sure you've got the right mile? Silence answered, no click, no sign-off. Up ahead, the off-ramp for the station peeled away from the highway. Its lights glowed an even yellow. The building looked different. No cracks in the lot, no weeds in the concrete. The windows shone faintly with interior light. The scales themselves gleamed wetly in the glare, as if they'd just been washed clean. The overhead sign above the lane showed a solid green arrow. Lena's stomach twisted. Every part of her training said the same thing. When a way station is open and signaling you in, you don't blow past it unless you want a ticket and a bad mark on your record. But no one had opened that place in a decade. Her hands sat frozen on the wheel for one long second, the truck rolling forward on momentum. The nose of the rig lined up with the off-ramp. Her turn signal was off. Her foot hovered over the brake. Southbound reefer, Lena. The voice came again, softer now, somehow closer, curling up from the CB speaker with a static hiss. You missed the turn, don't worry. We'll catch you next time. Her name landed like a weight in the small cab. The exit slid past her right shoulder and fell away behind. In the mirror, the station lights looked dimmer, as if seen through fog, shrinking into the dark. Lena's heart pounded. She drove another mile before she could force her shoulders to unclench. The road returned to its usual lonely sameness. Her headlights painted the next marker, 44. She clicked the CB off. At the next truck stop, an hour or so down the road, she pulled in and parked between two darkened reefers. The building's warm light and the smell of fried food felt almost unreal after the last stretch. Inside, a handful of drivers hunched over coffee and late meals. She sat at the counter, fingers still faintly trembling, and ordered black coffee just to have something hot to hold. An older driver in a faded ball cap took the stool beside her, his reflective vest draped over one shoulder. He nodded in greeting, then glanced sideways, taking in her pale face. Rough patch, he asked. Just tired, Lena said. Then after a beat she added, You ever run past mile 43 on 92, that old station out there? The man's eyes sharpened. Sure, been closed forever. Why? You ever hear anyone on the CB using it? He studied her for a moment, like he was weighing whether she was joking. When he saw she wasn't, something in his expression shifted. Once, he said finally, couple years back, heard a voice clear as day asking trucks to come in. Everything lit up like it was 98 again. Only problem was, I just passed a sign from the state saying the building was condemned. He took a sip of his coffee. So I kept my tires on the main line and my nose out of their business. Who they? She asked. He set the cup down. Far as I'm concerned, if a place is shut and the state says keep out, I don't much care who's talking from inside it. Could be a bored trooper playing with a signal booster. Could be some kids with a radio. Could be something else. Doesn't change my answer. He slid a couple bills under his saucer and stood. Best thing you can do on that stretch is keep rolling. Don't give them your name. Don't give them your axle count. And don't go in after dark. Lena stared at her reflection in the stainless steel backsplash, his words echoing in her head. Don't give them your name. She hadn't. But they'd used it anyway. The next week, she was back on the same route. Dispatch routes didn't care about stories, and bills of lading didn't leave gaps on the map just because a driver had a bad night somewhere. She loaded, fueled, and headed north, the miles unwinding beneath her wheels. By the time she neared mile 43 again, a low, stubborn fog had crept in, flowing over the road in pale sheets. Her high beams only turned it into a bright white wall. She dropped back to low beams and slowed, fingers tapping a restless beat on the steering wheel. She had left her CB off ever since that night. The cab was quiet except for the engine and the occasional rattle from something in the sleeper. As the mile markers ticked down, 46, 45, something tightened inside her chest. The fog thickened. The shoulder disappeared, swallowed in gray. The world shrank until it was only her truck and a tunnel of milky light. Up ahead, through the murk, the green of a sign surfaced like a ghost. Way station 1 mile. The letters returned her gaze calmly. A small patch of her windshield fogged near her mouth. She realized she'd been holding her breath. Without quite deciding to, her hand moved to the CB and flicked it on. Static bloomed into the cab, then settled into a faint hiss. Don't do it, she whispered to herself. Just keep rolling. The ramp for the station would appear out of the fog any minute now. She pictured it in her head, saw it the way it had looked that first night, bright, clean, waiting. The radio crackled. Then, like a voice behind her shoulder, he spoke again. Northbound, a short pause as if he were checking a screen. Northbound freight, 4 axles, light load, that's you coming up on us, Lena. Scales are open. Weather's bad. Come on in where it's clear. Every hair on her arms rose. She hadn't said anything. She hadn't keyed the mic. Yet he knew her direction, her axle count, the fact that her current box was only half full. The weight gauge on her dash read light. She hadn't told anyone that. Her throat felt dry. She swallowed and thumbed the button, forcing her voice to stay level. Station at 43, this is northbound. State's got your building listed as closed and condemned. I'm gonna stay on the main line tonight. Silence answered for a heartbeat. Then a chuckle slid through the speaker, soft and nearly kind. You won't make it far in that fog, Lena. Ramp's clear. Lots dry. Come let us weigh you, just a quick roll. We'll get you through. Ahead, shapes began to emerge, guardrails, the shadow of an overpass, the start of an off-ramp yawning to the right. Through the fog, Lena saw a glow, yellow and steady, like lights burning behind heavy curtains. The wheel twitched faintly in her hands, following the familiar groove of countless trucks that had turned there over the years. Her truck wanted to follow that rut, to turn where its kind had always turned. Somewhere, very faintly, another voice whispered through the static. It was so soft she almost missed it. Keep going. It was high, Reedy, as if carried from a great distance. Maybe it was just cross-talk from some distant frequency bleeding into the channel. Maybe. The main voice rolled right over it, firmer now. "Lena, you need to pull in. You missed us last time. We don't like to be skipped twice. You're due." Due. Her palms grew slick on the wheel. The ramp loomed ahead, its entrance swallowed in fog. She couldn't see much past the start of it, only that the fog seemed thinner there somehow, like a mouth in the clouds inviting her in. The CB hissed, spat, then cleared again. "Don't stop." That faint second voice again, a little louder now. "No brakes at 43. Images she'd seen in old forums and news clippings flashed behind her eyes. A runaway truck years ago, a driver who lost his brakes on the grade and slammed straight through the station building. People in the comments saying he never had a chance. Others saying the place should have been shut down long before. She hadn't thought about that in months. Her truck drew even with the start of the ramp. For one dizzying instant, it felt like she was balanced on a knife's edge, some deeper part of the road waiting to see which way she would fall. "Last call, Lena," the calm voice said. No warmth now, no smile, just a flat official tone. "Lane 1 now." Her right hand hovered near the turn signal. The fog swirled in her headlights. The yellow glow from the supposed lot pulsed faintly, as if something behind it was breathing. The second, thinner voice cut through the static with sudden clarity, sharp as a shout. "Stay on the main." The words slapped through her like a jolt. She jerked the wheel just a fraction left, committing herself to the through lanes, knuckles white. The truck rumbled past the mouth of the ramp. For a fraction of a second, the fog parted, and she saw the truth of mile 43. There were no lights, no clean, open lot. The small way station building slumped in on itself, black against the gray, its roof partially collapsed. The windows were boarded. Weeds choked the cracked asphalt. The scales were buried in dirt and broken concrete. And where the ramp should have curved gently toward the building, the guardrail was missing. The pavement ended in jagged tiers at the edge of a drop. Beyond that, only empty air and the dark blur of a ravine falling away into nothing. Then the fog closed again, and all that remained was the steady drone of the engine and the hammer of her pulse. The CB went dead silent. No static, no distant voices, just a soft, unnatural hush. Lena drove in that silence for a long time. Only when the fog thinned and the stars came back did the familiar crackle of other drivers filter through again. A joke about fuel prices, a warning about a speed trap, the ordinary noise of the road. At the next pullout, she parked and sat with the engine idling, both hands still wrapped around the wheel. The memory of that broken ramp played over and over in her head, overlaid with the calm certainty of the voice that had told her everything was clear. If she had listened. She left the CB on, listening for that second, thin voice. It didn't come back. Later, at a small cafe tucked beside a truck lot, she asked one of the older locals about the station at 43. "Used to be a nasty spot," the woman refilling her coffee said. "Steep grade, bad design. They shut it down after that big wreck. Driver lost his brakes, went straight through the building, took out a couple of folks inside. They say he tried to warn them over the radio, but nobody heard in time." "Anybody still work out of there?" Lena asked. The woman shook her head. "It's been empty for years. They're supposed to tear it down, but you know how budgets are." She paused, then added almost reluctantly, "Sometimes, late at night, folks say they pick up calls from that mile, official sounding, telling them to pull in. Some drivers say they hear a second voice under it telling them the opposite." She gave Lena a measured look. "You run nights?" "Yeah," Lena said quietly. "Then you leave that place to itself," the woman said. "Whatever they're weighing out there, it's not your load." From then on, every time Lena headed toward mile 43, she felt that familiar tightening deep in her chest. She made a habit of flicking her CB off 5 miles before and turning it back on 5 miles after. She hugged the center of the lane through that section, eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look toward the ghostly shape of the darkened building through the scrub. Even so, on certain nights when the fog drifted low and the road felt older than the map beneath her, she swore she could feel another presence just off to her right, waiting patiently, as if it knew she'd be back. And once, just once, with the CB turned firmly off and the speaker dead, a faint, familiar voice seemed to brush against her ear as she passed mile marker 43. "Keep going," it whispered. "Don't stop, not here." She didn't answer, she didn't have to. She just kept the wheels turning and left that closed little patch of highway and whatever still worked inside it to someone else. Story number 3. By the time Marcus hit his 10th year on the road, very little surprised him. He'd hauled just about everything that fit in a trailer: produce, furniture, electronics, pallets of bottled water, and across all kinds of weather. His route for that October week looked simple: a deadhead pull of an empty refrigerated trailer from Salt Lake City to Denver, then a live load heading east. He wasn't thrilled about dragging an empty reefer over the mountains in early snow, but it paid, and it kept him moving. Dispatch had assigned him a trailer number he didn't recognize. When he rolled into the yard, he found it sitting alone on the far edge of the lot, parked slightly crooked, as if whoever had dropped it had been in a hurry to be done with it. The trailer was older than most of the fleet, white paint dulled to a chalky gray, streaks of rust along the rivet lines, the refrigeration unit a bulky older model that hummed even when it was off. No company logos on the side, just a faded outline where something had been peeled away years before. Marcus backed under it, felt the familiar clunk as the fifth wheel locked, then climbed out to crank down the landing gear. The air felt colder next to that trailer than it did in the open lot, a faint stale chill that didn't match the mild autumn night. He told himself it was just the metal holding onto a day's worth of lower temperatures. As he hooked the air lines and electrical, another driver rolled past slowly in a day cab, window down. The man slowed enough to lean out. "You taking 357?" he called. Marcus glanced at the small painted numbers on the trailer's front corner. 357. "Yeah, why?" The other driver shrugged, expression caught between a smirk and something more cautious. "Keeps cold, that one," he said. "Colder than you said it. Sleep with a good blanket if you're near it." He tapped his finger to his cap and eased away before Marcus could ask anything else. Marcus finished his checks, climbed back into his cab, and pulled out onto the access road. In his side mirror, the old reefer unit loomed on the front of the trailer, its dark intake grill like a blank, watching face. Once he hit the interstate, the miles started to unwind. The sky was clear and dark. Mountains rose in faint, jagged lines against a scattering of stars. The trailer rode well enough, no sway or clatter, just the solid, familiar weight behind him. Still, after an hour, he noticed the cold. It started as a draft along the back of the cab, like someone had cracked a window in the sleeper. He reached back to check the little sliding window behind the driver's seat. It was. Latch tight. He turned the heater up a notch. Warm air poured from the vents, but the chill clung stubbornly at his spine. A soft vibration started then, a low tremor humming forward from the trailer. He glanced at the reefer control unit mounted just behind his cab window. The digital readout glowed green, numbers ticking calmly, 36 degrees F. He frowned. He hadn't turned it on. The trailer was empty. There was nothing to keep cold. He tapped the controls, cycling through the settings. The unit showed itself set to off, but the temperature display stayed lit, the numbers dropping by a degree. 35 degrees F. 34 degrees F. He told himself the sensor was just reading residual cold from a previous trip. Older units held onto temperatures strangely. He could have gone back and checked the box, but the thought of stepping between the tractor and trailer on the dark shoulder of a mountain highway didn't appeal. He kept his hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road. A little while later, as he wound through a long, sweeping curve, he heard it. A dull, thudding sound from the back of the trailer. Then another. Not the metallic clank of loose equipment or the creak of the chassis, but a heavy, muffled knock, like someone had shoved a pallet too hard against the wall. Marcus checked his mirrors. No change in the way the trailer tracked. No swaying, no sign of anything shifting. He checked his speed steady. The night stayed clear around him, the road empty but for his own rig. The knocks came again, 3 in a row this time. They sounded closer to the doors. An empty trailer shouldn't sound like that. There was nothing in there to move. He said the thought aloud just to hear his own voice. It's empty. His words fell flat in the cab. At the next wide pullout, a gravel patch on the outside of a curve, half ringed by a low guardrail, he signaled and eased over, tires crunching on loose rock. The engine idled loud in the sudden stillness. For a moment he stayed in his seat, listening. No sounds from the trailer now, only the faint ticking of cooling metal and the hiss of the air system. Just a check, he told himself, that's all. He set the brakes, grabbed his flashlight and stepped down into the cold. The air that rolled around the trailer was sharper than the night he'd been driving through, clearer, thinner, as if it had passed over ice. His breath puffed white in the beam of the flashlight. He walked to the back, boots loud on the gravel, and aimed the light at the doors. The metal handles looked normal enough, a bit more frost than he'd expect clinging along their seams. A thin rime traced the outlines of the hinges, glowing softly in the light. He hesitated, listening. Silence. He undid the locks, each clank ringing a little too sharp in the open air, then pulled one of the heavy doors outward. It groaned, then swung. Cold poured out like water. Even with his jacket zipped, the chill bit through to his skin, washing past him in a wave that carried no smell. No chemical tang from previous loads. No hint of produce or meat. Just a flat, empty cold. He swung the second door open and raised the flashlight. The inside of the trailer was bare. Aluminum floor, white insulated walls. No pallets, no straps, no forgotten load bars. Only a faint dusting of frost along the far end, where the evaporator unit hunched on the ceiling. His boots rang hollowly as he stepped up into the box. The air inside was even colder, the kind of dry chill that made the hairs in his nose sting. He exhaled and watched his breath curl in front of his face. A small, irrational part of him kept expecting to see something in there anyway, a shape between the ribs of the walls, a shadow where none should be. There was nothing, only the echo of his steps. He stood still. From somewhere very faintly came a sound like cloth shifting, a rustle near the front of the trailer, then gone. He flashed the light up and down. No movement, no marks on the walls. His fingers were starting to ache from the cold. He backed out, shut both doors firmly, and forced each latch down until it locked. When he climbed back into the cab, the heater felt weak, as if the truck itself had lost some of its warmth. The green digits on the reefer display now read 28 degrees F. He reached back and, more out of frustration than anything, yanked the breaker for the unit. The little display winked out. The sense of being watched ebbed, but it didn't vanish. Marcus drove on through the mountains, concentrating on the grades and the curves, letting the practical work of keeping the rig under control push away the unease. The knocks didn't return that night. The cold did. By the time he stopped at a truck stop outside of Laramie, the windows of his sleeper had filmed with a fine, feathery frost from the inside. He woke once near dawn, certain he'd heard gentle tapping against the cab wall, right behind his head. Not hard enough to be an emergency, just a steady, patient knock. When he yanked the curtain back and turned on the light, the sound vanished. On the inside of the sleeper window, lines of frost had formed, not the usual random fan patterns, but something more deliberate. For a heartbeat, half asleep, He thought they formed letters. Then his breath fogged across the glass, and the patterns blurred. At breakfast, in the diner attached to the truck stop, he mentioned the trailer in a roundabout way to the night cashier, an older woman who'd been there long enough to know regulars and roomers alike. "That old 357, she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You running that today?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "Dispatch had it sitting out by itself. Feels like it's running cold even when the unit's off." She poured his coffee and rested the pot on her hip. Her gaze went past him for a second, as if she were seeing something much farther away. "They had a bad run with that one a few years back," she said. "Driver came through here middle of winter, reefer full on, wouldn't shut off. Said he kept hearing things in the box, scratching, tapping, real upset." "What was he hauling?" Marcus asked. The woman's mouth flattened into a line. "Didn't say, it was sealed. When he got to the drop, they opened it up and they had a problem. A couple of people had climbed in unnoticed where it loaded. They didn't make it to the other end." She shook her head. "After that, the company tried to get rid of that trailer. Nobody wanted to buy it, so it sits in yards, gets used when they're short." Marcus felt the coffee go heavy in his stomach. He thought of the knocking he'd heard, the empty box, the frost that seemed to move with intention. "You believe that kind of thing?" he asked lightly. "Trailers hanging onto things?" The woman didn't answer right away. Steam curled up between them from his cup. "I believe places can remember," she said at last, "even if they're made of metal and bolts instead of brick and wood. If enough fear and confusion get left in one spot, some of it sticks. Maybe it tries to finish the trip it never did." On the way back to his truck, Marcus walked the length of the trailer slowly, palm brushing the cold metal. The number 357 looked ordinary enough in the daylight. He still had to get it to Denver. Dropping it early would mess up his schedule and anger dispatch. Leaving it at the truck stop wasn't an option. By the time night fell again, the road had quieted. The lights of other vehicles were rare and distant, small islands in the dark. Stars pressed close above the plains. The cold returned, creeping in from the back of the cab like a rising tide. The knocks started around midnight. Soft, regular taps against the inside of the trailer, not loud enough to suggest panic, not random enough to be mechanical. 3 at a time. A pause, 3 again. He tried ignoring them, turned the radio up, sang along under his breath, focused on the white lines ahead. The tapping persisted, steady, patient. Finally, against his own better judgment, he spoke aloud, voice rough in the quiet cab. "I know you're there," he said. "If anybody's there, but I can't open this box on the highway. I have to take you where you're supposed to go." Saying it felt foolish. Yet the moment the words left his mouth, the air behind him seemed to settle, the draft smoothing out, the strange pressure at his back easing just a little. The tapping changed, not louder, just closer together like someone shifting their weight toward the door. "I'm taking you east," he murmured, eyes on the road. "Denver first, then someone else will haul this box, but this trip," he tapped a finger on the wheel, "I'll get you as far as I'm meant to, that's what I can do." He drove like that for hours, talking in low, practical bursts whenever the quiet grew too heavy. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't apologize for something he hadn't done. He just kept promising, with the simple stubbornness of someone who had committed to a route, that he wouldn't park the trailer on some forgotten backlot and leave it behind. Gradually, the knocks diminished. By the time the first pale smear of dawn rose behind him, they had stopped entirely. When he backed 357 into a drop yard on the outskirts of Denver later that morning, the sun was high, and the sky was washed clean blue. He set the brakes, climbed down, and walked to the rear, more tired than he could blame on the drive alone. Frost still clung faintly to the door seams, even in that sunlight. He opened the doors carefully. Cold air slipped out, but it no longer felt biting, just cool, like stepping into a shaded room. The trailer was empty as it had been before. No marks on the walls, no boxes, no forgotten pallets. Only, near the very front of the floor, where frost had lightly dusted the metal, was an odd, clean patch in the shape of a long oval, as if something had lain there until very recently and then risen. Marcus watched his breath drift for a moment, then nodded once, more to himself than to anything else. "End of the line for me," he said quietly. "You'll have to ride with someone else from here." He closed the doors, locked the latch, and walked away. Months later, back at his home terminal, Dispatch tried once to put 357 on his load sheet again. He shook his head, mildly but firmly. "Give me anything else," he said. "Dry van, flat, another reefer, just not that one." The planner looked at him curiously. "Problems with it?" "Reefer's old," Marcus said. "Runs too cold." The man grunted, tapped a few keys, and reassigned the unit without argument. Every so often, in different yards and lots across a half-dozen states, Marcus would spot 357 parked at the edge of things, alone by a fence line, or backed against a disused dock. On overcast days, a faint sheen of frost seemed to cling to its roof even when the air was mild. Once passing it at dusk, he saw that the small interior light near the trailer's ceiling was glowing softly through a hairline gap in the doors, though no one was loading or unloading. As he watched in his mirror, the light flickered and went out. He never hauled that trailer again. But on long, cold nights, when the rear of his cab inexplicably felt just a degree or two colder than it should, he found himself glancing at the reefer controls and listening, very carefully, for a distant, patient knock. Story number 4. Ross liked the late runs where the highway emptied out and the world shrank to his headlights and the thin white lines ahead. He ran freight between El Paso and Oklahoma City twice a week, cutting across long stretches of West Texas where the land rolled flat and restless under a huge sky. He knew that route the way some people knew the rooms of their own house. Every gas station canopy, every crooked billboard, every little town that flickered by with a single blinking light. He knew where the speed traps waited and where the pavement dipped just enough to make the trailer shudder. He also knew there weren't supposed to be any big construction zones on that stretch. Dispatch would have warned him. Other drivers would have grumbled about it on the radio. That's why, the night he saw the orange glow on the horizon and the first reflective sign flashed past his windshield, something in him stiffened. "Road work ahead, prepare to stop." The words glared white on orange. Beyond the sign, the darkness ahead had that hazy quality he associated with floodlights. And dust. Ross checked the clock, then his GPS. No alerts, no lane closure markers, nothing about construction. He flipped his CB to the usual channel. "Any of y'all seeing work up on 62?" he asked, "running east out of Carlsbad." Static answered him. No voices, no jokes. The channel felt emptier than it should have. He drove on. A few minutes later, another sign appeared. "Left lane closed, merge right." But the arrows below it were reversed, as if someone had swapped the lettering and the direction. Ross frowned and eased into the left lane anyway, following the physical cones that began to appear along the right shoulder. They stood in neat, glowing rows, perfectly spaced, their reflective collars catching his headlights. Up ahead, the scene brightened. Portable light towers bathed the highway in a hard white glare. Shadows fell the wrong way across the lanes, long and sharp, like they'd been painted there. As he rolled closer, he saw a single figure standing at the merge point. The flagger wore a bright yellow vest with thick reflective strips, a hard hat, and dark safety glasses even though it was long after midnight. A stop-slow paddle rested on one shoulder. The man or woman, it was hard to tell in all the gear, didn't look up as Ross approached. The paddle showed slow toward Ross's lane. He eased his foot off the accelerator and rolled by at the posted work zone speed. The flagger's head never turned. Not even a flicker toward the huge truck passing within a few feet. The reflective strips on the vest were perfectly clean, unscuffed, as if they'd never seen dust or diesel soot. Beyond the figure, though, there was almost nothing. No excavators, no piles of crushed rock, no glowing cigarette tips from workers taking a break. Just cones, rows and rows of them, gently guiding him into the left lane, and light towers humming on their tripods. Ross's grip tightened on the wheel. He'd rolled through enough night work to know the signs. Half-finished bridge decks, temporary barriers, the smell of fresh asphalt. This was too clean, too empty. He watched the side of the road carefully, looking for parked pickups or equipment trailers. There were none. The CB crackled softly, then hissed back into silence. For 10 minutes or so, he drove through that artificial daylight, surrounded by cones and pale light, his tires humming on the same unbroken strip of old pavement. No machinery, no workers, no other vehicles, just the flagger behind him, long gone from his mirrors and the strange, sterile zone ahead. Finally, another sign appeared overhead, suspended from a portable frame that hadn't been there before. Detour ahead, follow pilot car. As if on cue, a pair of amber lights flickered to life on the shoulder ahead. A white pickup eased onto the lane in front of him, small sign in its tailgate window glowing. Pilot car, follow me. Ross's heart skipped once. He checked his mirrors. No one behind him. No headlights pressing for a pass, no cars stacked up impatiently. It was just him and that pickup, its taillights a steady red. He keyed the CB again. Pilot up ahead on 62, you got a copy. No answer. The pickup didn't so much as wobble in its lane. The highway curved gently right. The pilot car's turn signal blinked. A set of cones parted, creating a gap that led down a gently sloping temporary ramp. The white pickup rolled onto it without slowing. Detours weren't unusual, but they were supposed to be marked on his GPS. And the last time he'd driven this stretch, only days ago, he'd seen nothing. Ross bit the inside of his cheek and made a decision. He followed. The ramp dipped and curved. For a few seconds, the main highway rose above and to his left, shielded by temporary walls of concrete barrier. Then the detour leveled out into what looked like an older stretch of road running roughly parallel. The pilot car maintained a steady, almost mechanical speed. Its amber beacons flashed in perfect, unchanging rhythm. Ross stayed 2 truck lengths behind it, eyes flicking between the pickup and the dim landscape beyond the cones. On his right, scrub and low, thorny bushes slid past. To his left, concrete barriers blocked any view of what lay beyond. The lights from the main highway were gone. He dropped just enough in elevation that he couldn't see over the wall. There was no sound of other vehicles anywhere. No faint whoosh of passing cars, no hum of traffic. Just his own engine and the flicker of the pilot's lights ahead. The first sign on the detour read detour, 2 miles. Ross nodded to himself. 2 miles, he could handle that. The road beneath his wheels felt a little rougher, the surface less even. Not unusual for a temporary route. The air smelled dry and old, like dust that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. He watched the odometer creep forward. 1 mile passed, then another. The pilot car didn't slow. The barriers stayed high and unbroken. No end detour signs appeared. No ramps led back toward the main line. When his odometer showed he'd gone nearly 4 miles, Ross's fingers began to ache from the way he held the wheel. "This is too long," he muttered. "Too long for a 2-mile detour." The white pickup's taillights glowed ahead, unwavering. He still couldn't make out any detail through its back window. Not a headrest, not a steering wheel, not the silhouette of a driver. Just a vague darkness behind the glass. He flashed his high beams once, a quick pulse. The pickup gave no sign it noticed. A new sign loomed, half lost in shadow. Detour 2 miles. Ross's stomach dropped. The sign was identical to the first one. The same bent corner. The same paint chip near the word detour. He was sure of it. He hadn't turned around. He hadn't looped as far as he could feel. But all along the right shoulder, the same leaning mesquite tree he'd clocked earlier hunched over the ditch, its trunk split in the same way. He looked at the clock on his dash. Only a handful of minutes had passed since he'd left the main highway, not long enough to account for the distance his gut told him he'd traveled. A faint, dry taste filled his mouth, like the air itself had gone stale. He flicked the CB back on. White pilot car in front of eastbound freight on detour. Come back if you can hear me. Silence. Any eastbound on 62 seeing a construction detour, he tried. Any westbound seeing closures. Y'all awake out there. Dead air answered him. No background chatter. No distant voices. Just the gentle hiss of an empty channel. The white pickup's amber lights pulsed. The barriers kept going. Ross's mind started to pick at details now, lining them up in ways he didn't want. The way the pilot car's speed never varied more than a mile or two per hour. The way it took the soft curves of the detour without any visible steering corrections. The way he never quite caught the glint of chrome or the bounce of suspension, even when the road roughened. He let his hand fall to the steering column and clicked off his high beams, plunging the edges of the road into deeper shadow. The pickup's taillights glowed ahead, lonely in the dark. Beyond them, the night pressed in, thick and empty. When he flipped his beams back on a moment later, his stomach clenched. Up ahead, just beyond the pilot car, a tall, skeletal structure loomed out of the dark. A bridge, half built or half destroyed, its beams etched stark against the starless sky. The detour appeared to angle toward it, the barriers narrowing. He hadn't seen a single sign warning of a bridge. No weight limits, no caution markers, just cones and the word detour repeated like an order. The pilot car rolled onward. Ross looked at the barriers again. They weren't fresh-placed concrete. They were old guardrails bolted to leaning posts, streaked with rust. In his headlights, he could see darker smears along their faces, long black arcs where tires had kissed and skidded. He took a slow breath. Something in him, an old, road-hardened instinct that had nothing to do with maps or dispatch notes, whispered that he was being led somewhere he wasn't meant to go. Up ahead, the outline of the bridge resolved more clearly. Chunks of its deck were missing. One end jutted out over a darkness that swallowed his light. The detour lane seemed to curve up and onto it, but the curve was wrong, too sharp for the speed the pilot car maintained. He eased off the accelerator. The pickup did not. It continued unwavering. At the base of the bridge, a cluster of reflective shapes caught his eye on the right, just beyond where the cones lined the edge of the drop. Rectangles leaning. Signs. He squinted, the words blazing up as his lights caught them. Road closed. Bridge out. No access. The pilot car drove straight past them. Ross's pulse beat in his ears. In that moment, every mile of flat Texas highway he'd ever driven, every weight check and weather report and piece of advice traded over diner coffee, funneled down to one simple, stubborn thought. No. He checked his mirrors. No one behind him. No one to be forced off the lane if he stopped where he shouldn't. The detour surface ahead showed the faint, dark arcs of skid marks veering right toward the edge, then disappearing. He tightened his hands on the wheel, sucked in a breath, and did the thing every sign in that false work zone told him not to. He left it. There was a break in the row of cones to his left where the shoulder widened, a spot that might have been used by supervising vehicles once. He aimed for it, eased the wheel over as gently as he could, and bumped across the painted line. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hesitate, as if something had a grip on his trailer and didn't want to let go. Then the sensation snapped. His tires hit older, rougher asphalt with a jolt. The cones fell away to his right, a collapsing tunnel of orange and white. He braked hard enough that the load shifted slightly, bringing his rig to a controlled stop on what looked like the crumbling edge of an abandoned access lane. In his windshield, the scene ahead looked different now. The pilot car was gone. No taillights, no amber flash. The detour lane that had run so smoothly now ended in a jagged break just beyond where he'd left it, dropping straight into a steep ravine. The half-bridge rose above, its girders exposed, deck unfinished, a rusted skeleton cutting across the gap. In the pale wash of his headlights, he could see old damage along the torn edge of pavement. Broken concrete, twisted guardrail posts leaned outward like snapped bones. Scattered among the rocks below, half hidden by brush, were shapes that might once have been pieces of vehicles. No detail, just hunched, unnatural angles in the shadows. There were no lights, no cones, no signs of active work, only a weather-faded barricade at a safer distance, its reflectors dull and its road closed legend barely visible under years of grit. The air felt strangely still, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. Ross sat there, engine idling, hands shaking lightly on the wheel. He flipped his CB on again, with a thumb that didn't quite feel steady. "Any eastbound on 62, he said, voice rough. "Y'all seeing any construction where the old Harmony Bridge used to be?" A beat of static. Then a gravelly voice came through, faint but human. "Negative, driver. That bridge has been out for years. They shut that whole section down after a couple trucks went over. No active work. You sure you're on 62? Ross exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said, "I'm sure." "You sound spooked," the other driver said, not unkindly. "Best advice. If you see lights and signs out there that don't match what the state says, you trust the map, not the cones. Harmony's claimed enough of us." Ross looked again at the drop, at the black gap where the road should have been. "Copy that," he said quietly, "sticking to the map from now on." It took some careful maneuvering to get turned around on that narrow shoulder, but eventually he eased his way back toward the true main line, where the real highway waited, dark and undisturbed. No cones, no glare, no flagger. Just the night and the honest white lines. Hours later, rolling under a softer sky with a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, Ross kept seeing those phantom cones in the corner of his eye, the unwavering taillights of a truck that might not have ever existed. And on future runs through that stretch, whenever he saw a flash of orange or the suggestion of a portable sign, he always checked twice, once with his eyes, and once with the quiet, wary instinct that had turned him out of a lane that ended in empty air. He never saw that pilot car again. But sometimes, out there in the long dark, other drivers would mention a strange work zone no one had heard about, or a detour that didn't show on any system. Whenever they did, Ross would listen carefully, and then say the same simple thing. "If the road starts telling you to go somewhere the map doesn't know," he'd say, "you don't follow. You stay where the paint's been there long enough to crack. You stay on the real road." Story number 5. When Mark and Jamie bought their truck, it already had a lot of miles on it. They'd saved for years, running company trucks and stacking every extra dollar, dreaming of the day they could paint their own name on the doors. When they finally found a used sleeper rig that wasn't rusted through or wildly overpriced, they signed the papers without looking too closely at the history. It was a deep blue tractor with a long sleeper, the kind you could almost live in. The dealership had stripped off the old company logo, buffed the paint, and hung a cheap little air freshener from the dash that smelled like fake pine. The salesman had patted the door like it was a loyal dog. "Runs solid," he said. "Previous owners were a team, put a lot of highway under these tires. You boys are gonna get plenty more out of her." Mark and Jamie were cousins, both in their 30s, both used to long nights on the interstate. They took the keys, posed for a quick photo, and rolled off the lot grinning, convinced their life was finally theirs. The first few weeks went smoothly. They settled into a rhythm. One drove while the other slept, swapping out every 8 or 9 hours at fuel stops and rest areas. The truck felt good. Strong engine, decent brakes, no surprises on the grades. The sleeper was clean, with 2 bunks stacked like narrow shelves, a little fridge, and just enough cabinets to hide their clutter. They started to notice the odd things slowly. It began with small details. One night in New Mexico, Jamie crawled into the top bunk while Mark took the wheel. Hours later, Jamie woke to the sway of the truck taking a curve and the low murmur of the radio. He lay in the dark, listening to Mark humming off-key to some old song. Then he heard something else. A soft creak from the ladder at the end of the bunks, as if someone had put a foot on the bottom rung. A fabric whisper, like a sleeve brushing the wall. The feeling of another body shifting its weight somewhere in the small sleeper, in that thin slice of space between the bunks. He froze, heart thudding. He knew Mark was in the driver's seat. He could feel the faint vibration under his feet and hear Mark mutter at someone on the CB. The sound came again, just once. A gentle, careful step and then stillness. Jamie told himself he was dreaming. He closed his eyes, forced his breathing to slow, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, over coffee at a truck stop in Amarillo, he almost mentioned it. But Mark was going on about fuel prices and a dispatcher who tried to short them on detention pay, and the words felt foolish in his mouth. "You ever walk around in your sleep?" was what he ended up asking instead, stirring sugar into his cup. Mark looked up. "Not that I know of. Why?" "Nothing," Jamie said. "Weird dream, that's all." A week later, Mark had his own moment. They were running east out of Flagstaff on a clear, cold night. Jamie had crashed hard in the top bunk after a long shift. Mark drove in that quiet zone where the CB was mostly static and the road stretched ahead like a ribbon of black glass. He wasn't tired. He'd had coffee at the last stop. His eyes felt sharp, his hands steady on the wheel. Somewhere near Winslow, though, he felt a strange tug at the edge of his attention, the sensation of not being alone in the cab. He checked his mirrors. The sleeper curtain was half drawn behind him, a dark rectangle. Beyond it, he could hear Jamie's steady breath. The feeling didn't go away. He drummed his fingers on the wheel. "Weird night," he muttered. That was when something in the passenger seat clicked. He turned his head sharply. The seatbelt on the passenger side, which had been hanging limp a moment before, now lay flat against the backrest, buckled as if holding an invisible weight. The strap cut cleanly across empty air, the buckle snug in its latch. Mark stared. There was no way Jamie had reached forward in his sleep, buckled it, and flopped back into the bunk without making any noise. And Mark knew he hadn't touched it. He'd been alone up there, or at least he'd thought so. The hairs on his arms rose. He flicked his eyes back to the road. The highway ahead remained unchanged, a silver line under his lights. When he glanced back at the seat again, the belt hung loose, unbuckled, exactly as it should have been. He told himself the jolt of a pothole had knocked it against the latch just right, made it click and then pop free. He told himself this, but he didn't believe it. He didn't mention it to Jamie, not yet. Strange things like that kept happening, small and easy to dismiss individually. An empty coffee cup that seemed to move a few inches between stops. The sleeper curtain shifting in a draft that shouldn't have been there. The faint impression in the lower bunk's thin mattress in the morning, like someone heavier than either of them had been sitting there overnight. Mark started calling it the third man as a joke. "Make sure you leave some space on the seat," he'd say lightly when they climbed back into the cab after a fuel stop. "Third man's riding shotgun tonight." Jamie would roll his eyes but not argue. Jokes made it easier to pretend it was nothing but imagination, the creeping weirdness of too many miles and not enough real sleep. The truck had come with a stack of old paperwork stuffed into one of the overhead compartments, maintenance logs, inspection forms, a couple of faded fuel receipts from years back. One evening, waiting for a dock in Kansas City, Jamie dug through them out of boredom. Near the bottom of the stack, he found a worn manila envelope. The logo on the corner belonged to a company they recognized from old trailers still rattling around the interstates. The company itself had gone under a few years before. Inside the envelope was a photocopied accident report. Jamie scanned the lines, the bureaucratic handwriting barely legible. 2 drivers running team, eastbound on an icy grade in Wyoming. Driver at the wheel lost control on black ice, trailer swung, tractor rolled. 1 driver in the bunk, 1 strapped into the driver's seat. The bunk side of the cab took the worst of the impact. The report listed 1 fatality. The name was blacked out. Jamie stared at the diagram of the crash, the little marks showing where glass had shattered, where the cab had collapsed. The sketch of the truck looked familiar in a way that made his mouth go dry. Same model, same sleeper configuration. He didn't say anything right away. He folded the report back up and put it away. That night, as snow hissed against the windshield and the wipers beat a slow rhythm, Jamie took his turn at the wheel. Mark slept in the top bunk, limbs loose. A wind gust shoved at the trailer. Jamie corrected gently, eyes narrowed on the dark stripe of the road. He was drumming his fingers on the steering wheel when the radio crackled. The CB had been quiet for miles. He hadn't touched it. Now, without him reaching for the mic, the speaker spit static and then a soft, muffled sound like someone trying to clear their throat. "Knock it off, man," Jamie called toward the sleeper. "You're gonna spook me." Mark grunted something unintelligible and rolled over. The sound on the CB wasn't coming from him. It came again, a dry cough, then 2 clicks of a mic being keyed and released, like someone was trying to talk on a channel with no power behind it. Jamie's skin prickled. He flicked the volume knob down and drove on, heart beating a little faster. The next day, sitting at a diner with eggs and toast in front of them, he finally pulled out the accident report and slid it across the table. Mark read it in silence. His jaw tightened as he traced the outlines of the sketched truck with his finger. "So this is our rig?" he asked. "Same VIN," Jamie said quietly. "Frames original. They rebuilt the cab after the wreck, sold it off when the company folded." Mark's eyes moved over the block of text that described the conditions, the weather, the cause. When he got to the line about the driver in the bunk, he stopped. "Bunk side collapsed," he read aloud. "Occupant deceased on scene." The words hung between them like cold air. After that, it was harder to joke about the 3rd man. They didn't suddenly start seeing full apparitions or hearing disembodied voices hold conversations. It stayed small, subtle. Sometimes, when one of them nodded off for just a second too long at the wheel, the truck would seem to correct itself, a faint nudge in the steering toward the center of the lane. A random song would come on the old stereo at just the right moment, louder than the others, snapping them awake. On a long downgrade in Colorado, with Jamie asleep in back, Mark nearly missed a faded warning sign for a sharp curve. The grade had always been tricky, but construction had changed the angle, and the map in his head was wrong by a few crucial yards. As his drowsy brain tried to piece that together, his right hand slipped off the wheel. Something yanked his seatbelt tight across his chest, hard, pinning him back for a heartbeat. He snapped fully awake, eyes wide just in time to see the arrow of the curve sign flash by. He hit the engine brake, downshifted, and eased the rig through the curve with his pulse pounding in his ears. When he looked down, the seatbelt lay slack again. Later, as dawn smeared pale colors over the sky, he pulled into a quiet pullout perched above a valley. He killed the engine, the sudden silence ringing in his ears. Jamie blinked awake and slid down from the bunk, hair sticking up. "What's up?" he mumbled. Mark told him quietly. The missed sign, the tug of the belt, The way it had felt less like a mechanical glitch and more like someone grabbing his shirt front in a panic. Jamie listened without interrupting. When Mark was done, Jamie opened one of the cabinets and took out the accident report. He looked at the name that had been blacked out and the faint impression of letters visible underneath. "You think he's still here?" Jamie said. Mark glanced around the small cab. "Feels like somebody is. I don't know what he wants." Jamie looked out through the windshield at the empty road, the wind pushing low across the scrub. "Maybe he doesn't want anything," he said. "Maybe he's just still running the route, making sure nobody else goes out the way he did." They sat there for a long minute, listening to the tick of cooling metal. Finally, Jamie cleared his throat. "If you are here," he said, voice low but steady, "we know what happened. We found the report. We're sorry for it. But we're not gonna put this truck in a ditch, not if we can help it." Mark nodded slowly. "You kept us on the road a few times now, if that's you. We get it. You don't have to stick around, but if you're going to, maybe we can all agree on one thing." He rested his hand on the dash. "You help us keep this thing shiny side up and we'll keep the wheels turning. No bunk accidents, no dozing at the wheel. You don't have to watch it happen again." The cab felt different then. The air seemed to ease, some invisible tension unwinding. For the first time in weeks, when they hit the road again, the space behind their shoulders didn't feel quite so crowded. The odd moments didn't stop completely. On bad nights, when the rain came down hard enough to blur the windshield and the wind shoved hard at the trailer, one of them would sometimes feel a gentle pressure at their elbow, nudging the wheel a hair toward safety. When fog swallowed the road, the old CB would come alive just enough to hiss and crackle. No voices, just sound like someone clearing their throat to say, "Stay awake, stay sharp." Once parked at a small Wyoming truck stop not far from where the old report said the crash had been, Jamie woke in the dark with the certainty that someone had sat down on the edge of his bunk. He didn't move, didn't open his eyes. He just lay there, listening, feeling the weight of that unseen presence for a moment. After a while, the pressure lifted. The air in the sleeper warmed a degree, as if someone had stepped away and taken their cold with them. When he finally cracked one eye open, the dim outlines of the cabinets and the little fridge looked the same as always. Mark snored softly in the upper bunk. Jamie reached up one hand and patted the wall lightly. "Still here," he whispered. "We're still here." The truck ran another year, then another. They paid it off. They put their small logo on the doors and added a second rig, then a third. When they were finally in a position to retire the blue tractor, they didn't trade it in. They parked it at a quiet edge of a yard they'd bought, under a line of cottonwoods, and let the engine cool for the last time. On that final night, they sat in the cab one more time, 2 thermoses of coffee between them, the dash dark. "End of the line," Mark said softly, running a hand over the worn steering wheel. Jamie glanced at the empty passenger seat, at the seatbelt hanging loose. "We're gonna let you rest now," he said. "You did more than your share." For a little while, nothing happened. Then faintly, the old CB clicked twice. No static, no voice, just the sound of a mic button being pressed and released one last time. They sat there until the sky paled and the first birds stirred in the trees. After that, when they ordered a new truck to replace the blue one, the cab felt a little too big at first, a little too empty. But on certain nights, in certain stretches of lonely road, both men would occasionally feel themselves straighten up or blink awake for no obvious reason, just in time to catch a hazard they might have missed. When that happened, they'd glance at each other and say nothing. Because after all those miles, they both knew that some rider stayed with the road long after the engine shut down.